Happy Friday, Sifters, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. The show happens because some of you guys and girls are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. That is the Ask Shane tier. We just started publishing this show to our YouTube crew. Hope you guys are enjoying it. If you are, give it a like, leave a comment, share it, or you can go to patreon.com/sifted and give us a pledge. We'd really appreciate it. If you like Game Face, if you like Pachter Factor, if you like this show, if you like Dossier, any of the other content that we're doing, that's the way to support it and make sure it keeps happening. Now, people who pledge at that Ask Shane tier have priority in asking questions, but we do take questions from all of our patrons. But again, and I think you can understand, we do give precedent to those who are pledging at those higher tiers. Once again, we have a great slate of questions. Let's get to it. Okay, our first question for this episode, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to ask myself a question because you guys didn't ask it. I cannot believe nobody asked a question about the Xbox Game Pass price increases and the new tiers. Now, I can understand why maybe some of you guys did it because you're like, well, they kind of answered that on Game Face. And we did. However, that news broke while we were doing Game Face Live. We did not have a chance to really do any research. Vincent did a great job, actually, like rounding up some of the information for us so we could talk about it. But now that I've had time to really think about it and look across all the information, I have strong opinions about it. I'm surprised none of you guys asked, but I'm going to answer it anyway because I want to. So here you go. Here's the question from me. What are your thoughts on the Game Pass price increase and tier changes now that you've had time to think about it? From no one. Again, if you want to ask questions for this show, just go to sifted.net and up in the header, there's a link that you can click that'll take you to our forums where you can ask questions. And again, we're still struggling to get enough questions to do this show. I talk about it every week, and every week we just barely have enough to do the show. It would be great if we had more than that so I could kind of pick and choose the questions so that, like, I like to have a mix on this show of, like, you know, stuff about hardcore games, stuff about just more cultural stuff, but it's hard to do when you're only getting enough questions to fill out the show. So anyway, if you guys could go and ask some questions, that would be great. Anyway, let's talk about the new Game Pass pricing and the new Game Pass tiers. The first thing I would say, generally, my overarching opinion on what's going on here is that Microsoft and Xbox want everybody to pay full price for Call of Duty. Now, everybody knows the big acquisition of Activision Blizzard. The crown jewel there was Call of Duty. Everyone's big questions were, will Call of Duty appear day and date on Game Pass? And then they came out and said, yes, it will. And now we're finding out that only if you're subscribing basically to the higher tiers of Game Pass will you get that. But if you start really digging into some of the other pricing plans and the other tiers, I think it starts to become pretty apparent what is going on here and what Microsoft is trying to do. Now, I think everybody, when they watch stuff like Ask Shane or any other opinion-based show, you want to see anger. You want to see aggression. You want the person to find things that are unfair or unsavory in the information. And I guess if you're looking for that, the one thing I can deliver for you that really pisses me off about this is that basically the way Microsoft has set up these new plans, it favors the drive-by Game Pass subscriber instead of rewarding your most dedicated subscribers on Game Pass. Let me explain what I'm talking about. So if you're a dedicated Game Pass subscriber, which most of us are, people who are watching this, if you're a sifted subscriber, a sifter, you're hardcore. And so chances are most people who subscribe or are patrons, you guys are subscribing to Game Pass, and you're subscribing to Game Pass Ultimate. Now, right now, that is around $16. With these new plans, that is going up $20 a month. So if you do the math, extra $4 a month times 12 months, basically, if you're a dedicated subscriber to Game Pass, you're going to spend now an extra $50 a year on Game Pass. Now, how much do you think Microsoft and Xbox lose on each sale of Call of Duty? If you're thinking around $50, ding, 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 you've got it right. So basically, they're saying, look, our most dedicated subscribers, who have been, a lot of which have been with Game Pass since it launched, are now going to pay for Call of Duty. Like, they may not want to pay for it, but they're going to pay for it if they keep their Game Pass Ultimate subscription. Now, imagine you're someone who's never subscribed to Game Pass, and you're like, oh, the new Call of Duty's coming out. I heard it's going to be on that Game Pass thing. Well, you start investigating, you're like, I can play Call of Duty for $20 a month. I can jump in, I can spend $20, I can play the campaign in a day. I mean, it usually takes 4 or 5 hours to finish the Call of Duty campaign. And then I can play multiplayer for a month. And then if I'm really into it, I can decide to spend another $20. And then maybe you go for 2 months. And then maybe you go for 3 months. You're really into the multiplayer. Still, you've only spent $60. The game is $70. Now, to be fair, a lot of people who play Call of Duty, they play it all year long. And so, in some ways, those people would end up spending more if they stayed on Game Pass than if they just bought the game outright for Xbox or whatever platform that they have. Microsoft is basically saying, like, look, unless you are that person I just described who's going to be a drive-by Game Pass subscriber, who's going to get it for Call of Duty, and then maybe stick around for 2 months to play multiplayer for a couple months and then get tired of it, you're basically going to spend the amount of money that we want you to pay for the game, period, which is around $70. Other people who stick around longer than that, you have to remember now, are a part of us. They're a part of the most dedicated part of Game Pass. And maybe that's what Microsoft is hoping to do, is convert all those multiplayer players into our group, but that's not going to happen. Because you will spend like triple or quadruple for Call of Duty than you normally would if you just bought it. I hear you right now, you're probably sitting there going, but Shane, there's all these other games on Game Pass. Are there? For the person who is really interested in Call of Duty, are there really all that many games for them on Game Pass? I struggle to find many. Let's be honest, there aren't that many big third-party games on Game Pass anymore. It's either Microsoft's first-party stuff or the stuff that it now owns, or it's a bunch of indie games. And look, I understand a lot of people love indie games. Most casual players, Call of Duty players, they do not. So what is happening here? Why is Microsoft doing this? Because again, as I said at the beginning, I believe Microsoft wants everyone to buy Call of Duty for $70. I think at this point, Microsoft has given up on the idea that Call of Duty or any of its other games can really boost subscriptions of Game Pass. Now let me explain how that's happening. One of the old tiers is called Game Pass Console. Now, if you keep subscribing at that tier, you can stay on that tier. You're grandfathered in. However, if you drop ever, it goes away. And then you're forced into this new Game Pass Standard, I believe it is, that's $15 a month and takes away online multiplayer. Also, there's some ambiguity about which of those will give you day one. They give you like collections of games that they choose from. They don't give you the 2 free ones anymore. That hasn't happened for a really long time. And so there's these ambiguous collections. Sometimes you get 25 games. Sometimes you get 100 games. Who's picking those? Are they going to pick them for me? Are they going to look at my play history and say, hey, this is what you like. We're going to give you 25 games that we think you like. Or are they just going to create this? And I don't think that's going to happen. They're not. They're just going to come up with 25 games or 100 games, and that's what you're going to be stuck with if you're in one of those lower tiers. And then the question becomes, why drop Game Pass Console and then create this new Game Pass Standard tier that's more expensive, but you don't touch Game Pass PC, which is $11, and you still get the day one games? Now, granted, there aren't, you would imagine, there aren't as many people that who are Game Pass subscribers on PC as there are on console. And the other thing I would say, too, is that the casual people who they are hoping to snare with Game Pass, they're not going to have a gaming PC. They're either going to have like a Samsung TV that will work with Game Pass, or they're going to have an Xbox console. And again, if you're a console Game Pass subscriber, you're getting screwed. They're jacking up the price of that to $15, and they're taking away a bunch of stuff that you had in that old console tier. Another thing that Microsoft is doing is it's using the cloud as kind of a bargaining chip in the different tiers. Now, I would argue that we do not care about the cloud gaming in Game Pass at all. It's a nice little feature to have. I'll be honest with you, if they could lower the price of Game Pass Ultimate back to like $16 a month or $17 a month and remove the cloud gaming, I think almost all of us would be cool with that, but they're not going to do it. So instead, they're using cloud as like this thing to incentivize people. But again, cloud is only in the most expensive tiers. Cloud is, again, something you're hoping to snag casuals with. It doesn't add up. The demographics that we're dealing with here and the plans, none of it makes sense. Then you start talking about Core, which is basically the replacement for Xbox Live Gold. Now, live on the show, we got information that they had actually jacked up the annual price of that to $70-some. It used to be $60 a year when it was just Xbox Live Gold. But however, it looks now that actually that is, in fact, $60. However, here's the thing. They have removed online play from a couple of the higher tiers. And I think actually the new standard tier, they removed online play from. So the console version of Game Pass, they jacked it up by $5. They removed day one, and they removed online play. So basically, you're now having to spend that extra $5 a month for Game Pass Core to get all the same stuff that you were getting before from Game Pass Console. It is madness. Microsoft knows that Call of Duty is a big bargaining chip, and it made a mistake when it announced that it was going to be day one on Game Pass. It should have thought of this before it announced that, but apparently it didn't, and now it's trying to claw its way back without angering its most hardcore fans. It wants you to buy Call of Duty just like you always have. It is technically day one on Game Pass, because if you pay for the highest tiers, you're still going to get it day one. But that game in particular, does it hold that much value? Again, you're going to finish the campaign in 5 hours, and then you're going to play multiplayer as long as you want to. And again, month after month, that $20 keeps adding up until you get to the place where you're spending more for the game than you would have if you just bought it. And that is Microsoft's goal. It does not want to lose the Call of Duty cash cow. It's going to make a ton of money selling it on PlayStation still. It's going to make a ton of money maybe selling it on PC. It'll be interesting to see how PC Game Pass works out there. But typically Call of Duty doesn't sell that well on PC anyway. And now, Microsoft is hoping that you guys go out and spend $70 for that game on Xbox. Microsoft is basically admitting that it would lose its ass not selling its big exclusives in lieu of Game Pass. This shows that Microsoft's Game Pass plan was a failure all along. It might as well just go back to selling its exclusives and drop the price of Game Pass back down to 10 or less with a bunch of indie and third-party games. More importantly, this has become exceedingly confusing. For a service that should be catering to casuals, that is a massive mistake. Ultimately, most players, if they go the Game Pass route, will end up spending more money for Call of Duty, not less. And so I think organically, people are just going to buy the game instead of signing up for Game Pass for it. Okay, next up we have a question from Zet Saber. Can arcades ever make a comeback in the US? As a sole proprietor of the Duh Consulting Agency, what would you suggest to someone trying to open up a new arcade? Zed Saber, your timing is impeccable. The other night I was poking around on YouTube after I had wrapped up work, and I found a brand new arcade, gigantic arcade, that just launched very close to my little dinky hometown of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's in a little town called Hanover, and literally it is one of the coolest arcades I have ever seen. It is a little weird, the building that it's put in, because it's almost like it was put into a house. And so there are like multiple floors of the arcade. But from a personal perspective, to me, it's really cool to see someone like that so close to where I come from building an awesome arcade. And most of it is retro, I would add. Now, here's the thing. Arcades haven't gone away, Zed Saber. I mean, you have Dave & Buster's. I don't know how well that chain is doing right now. It doesn't seem like I hear a lot about it anymore. But not only are there Dave & Buster's, but like even, again, in my little hometown of Carlisle, PA, there's this crazy place where you can go that has like go-karts and miniature golf and like these a gigantic arcade, and has all these crazy VR games. I take my nieces and nephews there when I go home for the holidays or vacation or whatever, and we have a blast. So I don't know that arcades are dead, but I think what you're insinuating is the arcade culture. So a lot of you probably don't know this because you're not as old as I am, but like back in the 80s, like every little small town had a legitimate arcade. And I'm talking about towns of like 3,000 or 4,000 people. If you went to their main strip, their little downtown or whatever, there was always an arcade there, and a good one. Like an arcade with literally dozens and dozens of machines. Even mid-sized cities or towns like Carlisle, PA, every mall had an arcade, and like Carlisle had 3 malls. All 3 of them had an arcade in them. I think that's what you're getting at, and what would it take for that to happen? I don't think it'll ever happen. I'm just being honest with you. Like, I don't think we'll ever see a revival of arcade culture in America. And look, it's not even happening in Japan anymore. Sega closed all of its arcade centers except for one. So a lot of the arcades in Japan are also going away. And believe me, that culture hung on a lot longer in Japan than it did here, to be sure. The problem is that there's just no incentive to go to the arcades anymore because we have these great machines at home. And in a lot of cases, you don't even have to be that technically proficient to figure out how to work with emulation. So you have like a machine that has everything. In fact, I personally have friends in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, again, who have a basement where they have an arcade machine that has ROMs and everything installed on it, and it literally has every video game ever made. I have 3 friends who have those. So what incentive is there for people to go someplace else to play arcade games? Drinking, socializing. Like, there are barcades all over LA. There's like 5 or 6 of them at this point. I think in most mid-sized towns or cities, there's probably at least one barcade, a bar you can go to where you can drink and also play games. And so it's like a cool like event for people to go to, but like my friends aren't going to go to the barcade every night for happy hour. They're going to go to their favorite bar where all their friends are, and they're just going to go and drink. They're not going to go and drink and play games. So I don't see the arcade culture ever coming back. Could there be a resurgence? There could, but the only way that's going to happen is if there's a killer app. It's no different than consoles and other hardware. Arcade needs a killer app. There needs to be an arcade game that everybody knows about and learns about, and it's like, I need to play that, and I can't play it at home. And there's an opportunity for that. Some of the arcade games, the VR games now, are insane. Like, they're almost like the size of a small house. And so, with that kind of a footprint as a possibility, it seems like you should be able to make a crazy arcade game like no one's ever seen before. So, it does feel like there's a slight opportunity there, but it is slight. So, unfortunately, I think the arcade culture is just something that you're going to have to live vicariously through me to experience. People like myself and Matt Kyle, people who were there when it happened. I think you're just going to have to sit and listen to our tales about what it was like, because I really just don't see it coming back. All right, our last question for this week's episode comes from Pain of Demise. What would be your dream game? For example, mine would be The Witcher 3 as a Force user, with a lightsaber, of course, in the Star Wars universe. Star Wars Outlaws looks to be heading in the right direction for me, but not quite there yet. Pain of Demise, I think a lot of people would agree with you. I think a lot of people have waited for an open-world Star Wars game where you play as Jedi. Now, Matt and I talked about this on Game Face. He's a gigantic Star Wars fan, and he basically like poured cold water all over it. I disagree. I think it's very feasible and very possible to make an open world Star Wars game where you play as like all the most popular characters from the Star Wars universe. It's not against the law to make an open world Star Wars game set during the original trilogy. And could it happen someday? I think it will happen someday. Will I be alive to see it happen? Who knows? Like, I do hear you though about Ubisoft. I feel like this was an opportunity to do that, and instead, I don't know if it was a case of Ubisoft not wanting to pitch the golden cow to Star Wars and Disney, because maybe it's like, hey, this is the first open world Star Wars game. We don't want to push the envelope with Disney and Star Wars, so let's find maybe something a little less risky. Maybe that has something to do with why Ubisoft decided to take this tact with Star Wars Outlaws. Look, I'm still jacked up beyond belief to play the game. And I do wonder, it is still set during that time period, so you could rub elbows with some of the characters. I don't think Ubisoft has revealed all that stuff yet. I think that's going to be surprises for big Star Wars fans like us. So I guess what I would say is I kind of agree with you. That's kind of my dream game as well. I think it is for a lot of people. But talking about something else, more off the beaten path, and this comes right on the heels of Game Face 394, where we just talked about 2 games with the same plot. Think about it. We just had an episode of Game Face where the 2 biggest games that we discussed had the same identical plot. You are super soldiers trying to save the last bastion of humanity after everything goes to hell. It is the most generic video game plot, but we just keep consuming it and eating it up, and that's why we keep getting more and more of them. So I want to see games that explore different cultures. And we're starting to get a little bit of that, but we also, because we have this whole like uprising of weirdos who don't like games with people of color or women, like I'm wondering if they're starting to stunt the development of games that reach into these new spaces. I hope not, but they probably are. So I would just like to see games that just have different subject matter. Like, why can't we play games about like people who are in the punk rock and hardcore scene or the metal scene? Or I've mentioned it before, like I would love to play a game that's centered around people in the rave scene. It could still be an action RPG where you fight people in that, but the plot and the people that you meet, they're doing different stuff than being like some weird sci-fi super soldier. I realize that not everyone is as old as me. Not everyone has played as many games as me. But I'm really starting to reach like the saturation point, not just with these video game plots, but just the same plot in like movies and TV shows. I really feel like I'm starting to burn out a little bit on pop culture. Let's be honest. My generation is the first generation that really grew up with nothing, basically. Like when I was young, we had like literally 3 or 4 TV channels and have watched it go from that to where we have everything at our fingertips. And I've been consuming pop culture all those years, and it just feels like it's all starting to repeat. Like I haven't had a subscription to Netflix for months. I haven't had a subscription to HBO Max in months, and I don't miss it. Like I see the shows that people are talking about, and I'm like, like nothing is really exciting me anymore. That's a little scary because of setting, and that's because it's just all repeating. Unfortunately, I don't feel like there's enough people like me who are pushing for these new avenues, and until everybody else gets a little bit older like me and they've played games as long as me, it's probably never going to happen. So I just want to see new settings and new people in video games. I'm tired of the super soldier. I'm tired of being on this far-flung planet where a bunch of aliens are trying to kill you. I really feel like pop culture in general is starting to kind of go creatively bankrupt. Okay, that's it for this episode of Ask Shane Anything. Hope you guys have a great weekend planned. It is the middle of summer. Some of you guys may be on vacation. You may be listening to this in podcast form while you're flying or you're driving. If that's the case, what's up? Have a safe flight. Have a safe trip. I hope you guys have games planned to play if you're not out on vacation this weekend. And there's a couple, like there's the Concord beta this weekend if you want to check out PlayStation's Hero Shooter that's coming to PS5 and PC. If you're a PlayStation Plus subscriber, you can play that this weekend. I'm about to jump on it here in a minute as soon as I get this show all wrapped up. So anyway, hope you guys have a great weekend planned. Once again, if you want to help us out, please go to patreon.com/sifted. This show does happen because some of you guys are pledging at $7 or more per month there. We really appreciate all of our patrons no matter what you guys are pledging. We'll see you for Game Face on Tuesday.